Welcome to the Aerospace Ambition podcast. I'm Marius, an engineer passionate about sustainable aviation and AI. Today, we speak about what the US government undertakes to make aviation more sustainable. In particular, we will speak about an initiative called Contrails, which is an ensemble of projects run by the US-American agency ARPA-E. ARPA-E stands for Advanced Research Projects Agency, and the E stands for Energy. Contrails includes 5 projects which are aimed to reduce the warming impact of persistent contrail cirrus clouds caused by aviation. I'm excited to welcome Dr. Peter de Bock, a distinguished expert in electronics thermal management and aviation propulsion systems, currently directing programs at the ARPA-E. With a rich background that includes 18 years at the GE Research as a principal engineer and numerous leadership roles in power and thermal management, Peter has been at the forefront of advancing electrification in aviation. He's an innovator with around 40 patents, chairs the K16 Committee on Heat Transfer in Electronics of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, and boasts an impressive academic journey from the Netherlands to the University of Cincinnati. Welcome, Peter.
Very nice to be here, Marius. Look forward to talk to you. Thank you for inviting me.
It's great to have you. And I'd like to start off with a personal question, because before we get into ARPA-E, and that is, I went through your CV and I found it quite astonishing that after you graduated with a master's degree in 2002, you then worked for 6 years, then you re-enrolled in a PhD, you finished, you worked for 6 years, and then you re-enrolled again in a second master's degree in 2019. Now, especially since you were already working during that time, what made you go back to academic things like that? And what are you going to do in 2025?
I'm not sure if my wife will agree if I'll do another degree, but I find we should always be on a journey of learning. As a scientist, we have all a characteristic called curiosity, and by learning about things, we keep on growing and keeping ourselves fully engaged on the elements that are in front of us. And there's so many exciting challenges to address. What really inspired me on this journey is actually in the early part of my career, I got to work with an agency called DARPA. DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency that asked teams in the US to develop challenges that are moonshots. So a DARPA project is by definition impossible. It's considered 10 times harder than state of the art, but it's inspiring for teams to actually write a proposal to try to meet that goal. It's a very interesting thing. They call it the stretch goal in America. The DARPA program allowed me to, while working on that project, to also get my doctorate degree. And later on, when I worked further in aerospace platforms, trying to move some of the DARPA technologies into aerospace, I learned that we cannot just approach an aircraft as a single component, with components like avionics boxes or just a jet engine. We have to think holistically about the system. So I actually challenged my leadership that we really need to start understanding more about the aircraft as a whole, and that basically inspired my next degree. I would like to argue, Marius, that my current role at ARPA-E is equivalent to 2 or 3 degrees of others, because this has been a fantastic opportunity to learn about the energy landscape, but also have the opportunity to do something meaningful and actually make action on it.
That gives some of the background, and since you were dealing with moonshots, I think it perfectly sets the stage also for the next topics that we'll cover. But looking at ARPA-E, so for someone who has never heard about ARPA-E, or maybe people in Europe, right, that are not familiar with what is going on in the US, what is ARPA-E?
Sure. And I think I already mentioned DARPA, and DARPA is maybe a good way to introduce the ARPA model. So DARPA was founded actually to do transformative research that are moonshots that really help the US in a strategic way. DARPA is the initiator of the internet, the mRNA vaccines, as well as GPS satellites. So those kind of innovations were tremendous actually in changing the direction of the course of many technologies. ARPA-E was founded when in 2007, the National Academy of Engineers in the US identified that energy technologies are going to be critical for the future. And they wanted an agency modeled after DARPA called ARPA-E, ARPA Energy Advanced Research Project Agency Energy, to develop similar kind of really high risk, high reward innovations and give them a chance to be funded And if they would work, they would be very impactful. As an agency, it's very different than other research agencies where there's focus on just science or there's focus on investment where it has to be commercial. ARPA-E funds moonshots where it means if there's a portfolio program with 10 teams working on a single direction, only one of them has to succeed. It's okay if 9 of them fails. And that's very different where normally you try to do a goal that's not as far out so you can actually meet it. We look at the fundamental physics. Are no laws of physics broken? And if that, technical hypothesis can be made, can we then, fund teams to approach that from multiple shots? And Contrails is a program modeled in that direction, and so are all our programs within ARPA-E.
Right. Okay. Certainly something that every other region of the world can learn from the US. It's, I'd say, a startup kind of approach, right? You're expecting that not everything will go right, but in doing so, you move forward really quickly. And just briefly, a question on your personal role in the agency. How much percent do you act as an engineer and how much percent as a manager?
Oh, I don't know if I can put a percentage on that. I'll tell you what my role is and how it works, and then you can be the judge. How is that? I also want to introduce the second part of our program. So we have a technical hypothesis that we make to work, but our agency doesn't do policy. So if we find the technology that's much better, we have to find also an economic hypothesis to make it more cost effective. We cannot force people to use something different. So we want to make something work. It has to both do the same as the baseline technology, but do it in a sustainable way, and at the same time be economically more attractive. And I think to me that was extra challenging and extra appealing, because I think those are the mechanisms that really roll out new technologies. As an example, if you look at solar energy, right now it's not only a sustainable way to make energy, it's also the cheapest way to make energy. And how do we get equivalents like that in other areas is kind of what I do as a program director. Now, that balance between engineering and manager, I think it's a little bit of a mix, and I really can't put a number on that. But I am in charge of developing a technical hypothesis, looking at the landscape of an entire industry or segment, and say, is there a better way to do this? Or what are the missing gaps? What widget would be needed to make this field think about this or realize a completely different way of achievement? I have colleagues on the tech to market side. These are called tech to market advisors. Then help me develop the economic case for that. And when these two planets align, we go to our leadership. We said, hey, we would like to ask for funding for a program. And I have a few programs like that out right now. And then when the program launches, we solicit solicitations. We typically receive heavily oversubscribed challenges. And then the best of selections will be chosen to work with us. Now, when you develop a program as in a portfolio, we do look, are there multiple diverse paths to it? Sometimes a problem can be solved in multiple ways. So rather than putting all our projects in a singular path, we typically spread that around 3 or 4 to 5 or 6 paths so that together this portfolio can move forward, has a higher chance of success. And then when the program launches, we meet with these teams every 3 months. And during the program, this is also very unique. We meet with the teams and give them a green, yellow, or red card. Green card means they're on track to meet the program objectives. We give them some technical guidance, and that's where the engineer comes out. You can ask my teams. I'll give you the names. We really go deep technically and economically. Are you on track? Yellow means, hey, there's some concern here, some delays, but you're still probably going to meet the program goals. Red means, hey, it was really good that we tried this, but it's maybe not working out because it's just too hard, or we learned something new that we didn't anticipate before. The interesting thing about the red program is that if there are 2 reds in a row, sometimes we stop a program. We said, this has been great research. We learned that this might not be a viable path, but the remaining funding goes back into the pool of the program director, and I can amplify the tracks that are doing well. And this unique model is very unique to ARPA-E, and it's been very successful. Currently, our agency has launched over 1,500 projects this way, supported 1,500 projects with $3 billion, and has those individual projects have launched 200 plus companies raising $11 billion themselves and are valued on the stock market at $20 billion. these are incredible programs and incredible effectiveness. And our goal is to do similar innovations at the level of the internet, the GPS satellite, but then in the energy space. And that's what inspires me to work in this space.
Well, you just inspired me as well about these things and also the approach that you take, because I was wondering, how do you get from scientific research or scientific findings to then acquiring the money and allocating the funds? But I think that you outlined it. Could you maybe just briefly comment on this initial step? Because you said that you would make a proposal, given certain hypotheses, you would make a proposal to your leadership. So how was this process for Contrails?
Sure. The process, what you described, what you asked for, is called program development. Now, the interesting thing is most people are very down in details into their scientific fields. But if you roll it up, you actually get to very fundamental equations around energy at the highest level. So program development occurs at the very high level. In aerospace, we're looking at breakaway equations, right? Very simple equations that can very quickly give a description of energy as it flows through an aircraft and had the efficiency of flight. Now, Contrails actually is part of a portfolio of programs that was actually developed within the agency, which include reach, ascent, and cables, and as well as circuits. These are programs that were developed as a combined, kind of coordinated launch where we wanted to really increase the efficiency of aviation. And I'll give you an example, Marius. I have friends that have electric cars, and when they charge their car, they say when they charge the car at their house, they don't even notice the cost in their electricity bill because it's so cheap. If you look at the Tesla car with a very large battery, the equivalent energy in that battery pack, the 100 kilowatt hours, is typically between 1 or 2 gallons of fuel, which means somewhere between 4 to 8 liters of fuel. So basically, an electric car can move 300 kilometers somewhere with 4 to 8 liters of fuel. That is equivalent energy. So that's very efficient. The electric drivetrains are very efficient when they are electrified. The REACH program was set up first, where you take sustainable aviation fuels, produce electricity, and that electricity gets then used in the drivetrain at an efficiency of 60 to 70%. Currently, a jet engine, and I have a bit of experience coming in my prior background around jet engines, are limited by Carnot efficiency, meaning they have to be hotter or run at higher pressure to make higher efficiency. If you look at the overall fuel to propulsion efficiency, maybe about 50% for the engine, maybe 55%. Then you have a propulsor at around 80%. You're looking at 35% average, approximately from fuel, the pure molecular energy to thrust, right? An electric drivetrain can increase this to 60 or 70. So I have a 2x win right there. So REACH actually is focused on turning the fuels into electricity rather than shaft power. And then electricity to shaft power is done by Ascent, which are super high dense motors, which is another program I lead. We're making 1 to 5 megawatt aerospace motors that are somewhere between 3 to 5x more power dense than the world has ever seen. So that's super exciting. And I tell the teams that. I said, do you realize that you're making the world's most powerful electric motor? And these eyes light up, and I get excited by the teams that are doing such great work. Now, the last thing about this is, and that's how we get to Contrails, and sorry that it takes so long. When we're looking at the future, I think there is an opportunity to electrify a large number of flights, maybe 10 to 15% in the US, maybe even more in Europe, where the distances are smaller. Our portfolio, including a program we just awarded called Propel 1K for 1,000 watt hours per kilogram batteries, has on track that we can probably electrify 100-person flights up to 1,000 kilometers. That is incredible. And it's a moonshot. But the technology components work out if you do the math, 100-person flight, 1,000 kilometers. It does mean that there's a lot of flights that we cannot fully electrify because they're medium or longer range. And they will have to rely on SAF, hydrogen, or other fuels to be able to be sustainable in the future. So when I looked at our portfolio, I felt that we had not yet anticipated what the use of SAF and hydrogen would do. And of course, one thing you can recognize is SAF might be smaller molecule change, which means if you look at your Ca ratio of your carbon, your hydrocarbon, you will get more water production. And similarly on hydrogen, although you won't have any soot particulates, you will have 100% water come out. So I felt that the understanding of the space, what that would mean for global warming, was not yet fully evolved. So I went to our leadership and saying, well, currently we're investing probably over $100 million in all the other sectors that are based focused on carbon reduction. We have zero funding in the area where we really understand contrails forming, as well as their ability to create cloud formations. And I think that balance wasn't right. If you look at the radiative forcing, which is the true metric for global warming, the science presented shows that not only carbon emissions matter, it shows that contrails matters as well. And if you put all our work in one direction, am I making the other section worse? So if I have to sleep at night, I want to make sure that I have funded both sides with equivalent innovative programs and understand that overall, as a sum, radiative forcing will come out better through our programs.
You've described the hypotheses which go into making such a proposal or kicking off such projects. So what are the technical and economic hypotheses behind pre-trails, and especially with regards to economic hypotheses, how strongly are they linked with regulation?
There's a certain sequence you have to think of when you think about contrail formation, right? And then I'll get to your answer. So first you have to fly, then you have to emit water or particles or other mechanisms that will make a contrail. So one, do I make a contrail? Sometimes contrails evaporate very quickly and there's no problem at all. So two, is the contrail persistent? Three, is it persistent in what they call an ISSR, ice supersaturated region, where that particular element of the sky, of space, has the right conditions to grow into a larger cloud, right? So that's a third question now. And then the other questions are, can I mitigate all the other yada? So I actually stopped pre-trails at number 3 was the question. Pre-trails is a predictive, enhancing our ability to predict. Currently, we have some mechanisms that we know pretty well, I think, when we produce a contrail. That is not that hard to predict. But can we predict whether it grows into a cloud formation 5 hours later? That is really hard. The definition of pre-trails is predictive real-time emissions technologies reducing airborne induced lines in the sky. So we have a lot of fun making acronyms, but it really stops at the prediction part, because I felt this is a sequence of steps. First, we need to fix our ability to predict. I cannot ask yet for mitigation or other things, or maybe the industry will solve that themselves. But right now, when I looked at the ability, and I talked to many people in this area, our ability to correctly predict when it will be a cloud formation, there's still a very large error bar on that particular segment. And that is what I wanted to address first. And then later on, when that's fixed, we can go further. Now, what do you need to get that better is something else. And that's the next step. So therefore, our program focuses on 3 elements: better sensors. There's something called the Smith-Appelman criteria, where we need to understand the humidity, at air in the air when it's minus 50 degrees. So you have really cold air, very low elements of relative humidity. You need to have partial pressure sensors in the single pascals. This is a super accurate instrument that currently doesn't exist yet at flight 40 scale. So we need better sensors. We also need to train an algorithm that tells us if we sense this and we wait and we look at the sky for 5 hours, now we actually start correlating. This is the AI part, which you'll enjoy, is these sensors help us understand now we're actually making a persistent cloud. So the program is sensors, observation mechanisms, and the logic and AI kind of model that brings it all together. And one of the visions, Marius, is that an aircraft currently has a lot of sensors on it already. And if we can even start correlating all the sensors existing on the aircraft, maybe that might be enough. So I don't actually say maybe the sensor that we develop is just to train the model, but if the model at the same time tracks all the other sensors that are already present on the aircraft, maybe that as a whole can be enough that with a software push, we can understand really well where the pilot can fly And just like when you type in Google as a predictive algorithm, it'll tell you where you're flying right now, you're probably going to make a cloud 5 hours later. That's kind of where I want to go. And when that information goes back to the tower and the flight planning, now we actually have the mechanism to do it right. But that answer only matters if it is correct 80% or higher. And currently, when I look at the predictive ability to make that exact prediction for we're growing a full cloud 5 hours later, it wasn't accurate enough to be actionable. And this program hopefully helps the community to get to that actionable part.
And to motivate the community then also requires certain like economic hypotheses, right? So how far are you in formulating this hypothesis at this point? And how strongly is it linked to regulation from the outside versus motivation from the operator from the inside?
Pretrails is what we call an exploratory topic. So it's a special class of programs within ARPA-E that doesn't have as strong as a focus on the economics. It really says we need better sensors to first figure out what to do. I cannot speak for regulatory elements. That's not within the scope of our program. I felt first we need to get better at this. And I think that is, what this program will deliver. The economic hypothesis, this program doesn't have too strong of an economic hypothesis yet, but I find actually there's a lot of interest within the aerospace companies to work on this. And I think that's the other thing this is very unique at. In a large program, supported by ARPA-E, it is a great collaboration vehicle. In the past, I've seen a lot of research from universities, DLR is a leader in this space, NASA, Imperial College. There's been really fantastic groups working on this, but I did not see yet the large aerospace companies. So the program actually, Pretrails, brings in funding to bring collaborative programs where these universities and their agencies work together with the aerospace industry to solve this together. So one way to look at it is in these industries, the people that I've talked to wanted to work on this topic, but they said their leadership couldn't fund it yet because there was not enough strong hypothesis on it yet. But by me funding it and by bringing this momentum into the aerospace world, these topics are now at the level where they're discussed at the senior leadership tables in several large aerospace companies that are now really interested in this. Because although you mentioned this, people mention this as low-hanging fruit, it's still a lot of work needs to be done. And it is an area where this industry really wants to do something good and be sustainable. They do see this as an area where they could make an impact. And I think that's very important. And the second part, everybody wants to fly on SAF, and we cannot produce enough of it. But when this SAF is a very broad word for many different fuels, when we start introducing new fuels beyond the kerosenes that we know, we need to have a mechanism to qualify, are they, maybe the CO2 is less, but are they not producing more contrails? So this mechanism being in place is now qualifying tested grounds for new fuels. So it has a really strategic place in working on the future.
You mentioned there are 3 diverse paths to tackle this problem. You also started breaking them down already. Could you please elaborate for each of these 3 approaches on a little bit more detail how they will tackle the problem and how they are different from what's already out there?
Yeah, so let me clarify. So these paths, every team had to do all 3 of them. So I have multiple teams awarded, but every team has to provide I call them 3 pillars. Maybe I shouldn't use the word task. You need a sensor set of some sort. That is either a new sensor or something else that you want to measure. You need to have observations that can help you identify, am I producing a contrail? And the third piece is that the algorithm in the middle that brings it in together. We call it the AIC predictive model. And that really can take this very complex problem, all these sensor inputs, correlate, hey, watch the sky for 5 hours. Now all of a sudden a cloud forms because it's the trigger of that plane that flew there a few hours ago has now propagated this ISSR to start condensing in a chain reaction. So when you look actually at humidity sensing and altitude, this is a very difficult problem. Currently, the sensors to reach the single-digit partial pressures that you need to detect this are very big, and they need to be made aerospace worthy and small. But the second thing, if you look at the physics of actually measuring humidity most people use kind of an optical sensing system. And if you look at the absorption spectrum of water in the atmosphere, there are multiple frequency bands at which this can be done. So when we developed a portfolio of programs, we actually saw that a lot of proposals came in, some of them using advanced sensors, and they're very different in their nature, but also they use different wavelengths. And I like this a lot because that means that I have multiple shots on goal to make this actually a really successful program. And they just to highlight some of the approaches, there's 5 awardees within this portfolio, and we received many more proposals, and I wish I could do all of them, but I have limited funding. So the first one is from Raytheon. Raytheon is also the mother company of Collins Aerospace as well as Pratt & Whitney engines. So it's a very broad aerospace company. They're developing a sensor which they call Confirms, a sensor system. So it's really a system approach. That's important, where they can measure forward 100 kilometers ahead of the aircraft using the radar systems that they already own. They own the turbulence radar on the aircraft. They also own FlightAware. So they have a lot of interesting information, and they want to use that to measure forward using a LiDAR radar, multiple frequencies to detect whether there's the humidity ahead of the aircraft. Because they feel that if they can detect it 100 kilometers ahead of the aircraft, they can then make the right decisions to deviate or other decisions. So this is an on-aircraft measurement system detecting live whether it's going to produce a contrail. So I'm really excited about that, and I think it's a great team. And there's additional sensors, and I'll send you some more information so you can learn about this. The second team is Boeing. Of course, we know Boeing. They currently already have some really exciting sensors on their 737. It's called the WPSSS-2, made by Flight, a small company out of Canada. So they are advancing the sensor in such a way that it would be able to measure humidity at much more accurate levels than before. The current sensor they have was really set up for weather prediction, which doesn't require the accuracy that you would need for contrail prediction. And I know a lot of people are doing fantastic data science. We see a lot of articles around that, but I think all the data scientists love better data. And that's what this program will bring. This sensor, if they are successful, they're willing to explore rolling it out on all future aircraft. So that makes me excited for this team very much. The next one is GE Aerospace. Very interesting team. They want to use the jet engine as a humidity sensor. So they're actually not developing a new sensor. They want to use all the existing data and explore whether that can be correlated accurately enough to assess the humidity and contrail eligibility. They have partnered with MIT and Southwest Airlines to use the satellite observation technology from MIT, as well as Southwest Airlines to track all their flights. So they're going to track flights with satellites and correlate it to engine parameters that they have in their database. So again, very smart teams, brilliant people working on this program. It's only going to lead to exciting outcomes in my mind. The fourth is Northrop Grumman. They are a defense company. They have actually worked a lot on military aircraft. In the military aircraft, it's very important to understand your contrail formation. They've worked with JPL, where they have developed a new sensor that will give them a vertical slice of the airspace ahead of them. It's the vertically profiling airborne sensor that will be made very small and will be flown on their test aircraft within this program and correlated to observations that they'll make from satellites. And the last team is USRA, University Space Research Association, actually a well-known entity in the field of contrails. They are planning to make maps of the globe, where if that will be made available to flight operators to say, if you fly here, there's a high chance of contrail formation. So they work as they will track the individual flights, but use that to make these global maps. So these teams I'm very excited about having such great teams propose and work on this program. They're working closely, some of them with NASA and others, to make this work. And one of the things that's exciting, Marius, is that our goals are tough, right? So we set moonshots. The teams have to prove to us in 18 months that they are now with a minimum of 5 flights that either they track or fly themselves, that they can give me 80% confidence that particular flight produces a cloud 5 hours later. So they have to make a flight or look at a flight and tell me an 80% correct score, that flight's going to make a cloud 5 hours later. And we'll wait and observe and see if it does. So they have 18 months to develop sensors, develop algorithms, develop observation methods. But I think it's that momentum and that excitement and the ability to do something really meaningful that is inspirational. And I tell these teams, if you solve this right, you have the potential to take away 2% of global warming of the globe. And if that doesn't inspire you, it certainly inspires me.
Wow. Yeah, it also inspires me, like I said. And you mentioned that there is this traffic jam kind of indicating whether the projects are on track, and you have the ability to dynamically reallocate the budget to have the highest impact. Now, initially, I thought these projects only kicked off kind of recently, but now that you say, well, 5 flights, 80% of success rate and 18 months, that is very ambitious. So I think it's a fair question to ask, are all the projects yet on green?
Well, we're just starting the contract works. There's some things in government I can't speed up, but it's sometimes contracting and legal does take a little bit of time. So I would say they're just starting, and the first quarter reviews will start in about approximately 3 months from now. So their 18-month point will come somewhere in the summer of 2026. But I did actually, in the requirements, ask them to make this a very public event when these flights will take place. So I hope that you're there covering it, Marius.
I'll try my best. I'm just wondering to wrap this episode up here. I want to put everything that you say in the bigger picture. And essentially, you outlined the 3 dimensions or the 3 kind of angles to solving this problem. And yet there are already institutions out there who are trying to solve this, right? So when you said we're tackling it as a moonshot, of course, I'm smiling because that's very ambitious. And then yet maybe others will say, why do you say moonshot? That makes it sound like very far away. So the solutions that are out there, we had, for example, Mark Shapiro from Breakthrough on. We will speak to Adam Durant from Satavia very soon. So in this perspective, what exactly is the moonshot about this?
Right, the moonshot is making the global aerospace industry do something about it. Because people say they have solved it, but have you seen the airliners currently adopted? The answer is no. And if you ask them why, they say the error bar on your accuracy is too high. Because currently, if they would have to deviate the flight to a lower altitude, all of a sudden they're going to burn more CO2, they're going to burn more fuel. They're not comfortable with that because you're making a decision that might make the CO2 side worse. Right? So the science on the contrails has to be ironclad and very high confidence. And nobody was funding advanced sensors and advanced mechanisms. And that's why where pre-trails nicely stops. I even think there might be even more opportunities to mitigate contrails that are not even explored yet, that do not maybe require altitude deviations. You could maybe do something on the engine side, you could do something on the aircraft side. But I think right now I just don't know yet because I don't have the science in front of me to really make a strong correlation between all the factors. Now we have the Smith-Appleman criteria, but we cannot measure that. So I think having better data and having better correlations that get launched by this particular program is where we want to, what we would like to contribute. Now, it is very unique for the Department of Energy to fund something like contrails and pre-trail works. So I do think other agencies and other institutions are welcome to take over and build the momentum forward. But I feel that if we are looking at a future where we have a combination of electric flight, SAF, and maybe hydrogen, it's great to have the full spectrum covered with technologies that we work on the sustainable future. And that does include our non-CO2 emissions, such as contrails.
My last question for today would be something that looks at the entire globe holistically. And in an economy with limited funding and limited time, given global tipping points, it's important that we decarbonize ASAP. Now, why should we focus on aviation at all right now, as this is a sector that's hard to abate?
Yeah, so I think that's exactly why we should focus on aviation. I do think with people moving around the world, flight will be here and it will be growing. There are options to make fully sustainable flight, and I think those are coming through electrified flight, maybe SAF, maybe hydrogen. I think all of those will have their own place. The other way I see aerospace is that it's an incredible incubator for new technology. Anything I can do on an airplane, which is one of the hardest places to put things, will work amazingly on a ship or on a vehicle. So by pushing ourselves to our scientific frontiers through these platforms, all the other mechanisms of transportation are going to get better. We're not going to stop transportation, I think, because it's something that humans really enjoy. So, and it's also from our economic perspective, we move goods and we move people. And I think finding new ways to do that in a sustainable mechanism is important, but it can only be done if there are technologies that can provide an alternative. And I think those are not there yet for aviation, and therefore it's an area where we can work towards, because I think those technologies will come at some point, I hope, through our programs.
We have a tradition in this podcast, and that is that one guest passes on a question to the next guest. And the previous guest was 𝐨𝐤𝐤, who is working for the Federal Environment Agency in Germany. And he has been involved with drafting the proposals to essentially include non-CO2 effects in the framework, in the legal framework in the EU. Now, you've actually implicitly answered the question already that he asked you, and that was why is it so hard to put sensors in the air?
Yeah, it's hard to do a sensor in the air because you're flying an aircraft, you're in a space that it has to be safe, it has to work, and it has to be small, it has to be lightweight. An aircraft component is a unique part of the system. And that's why it's excited to work on that and make it work. If you remove 2% global warming, that's your chance for a Nobel Prize, a statue, and a Fifth Avenue parade. And it really inspires people, and it's true. It's a really big deal if you can do this. So I encourage people to become engineers and to work on these challenges together.
There certainly are a lot of aerospace engineers here in this audience. And of course, you also have the chance to pass on a question. And our next guest will be Nicolas Meyers from the Paris startup 𝐥𝐢𝐤𝐤. Is there a question that comes to mind that I could pass on to him? It could be something deeply technical, or it could just be something fun or even philosophical.
I would like to ask the question, what do you think is the future of electric aviation, and what percentage of flights could potentially be electrified if you look at the technology developments that are going on?
He will certainly have a take on that question. You've mentioned at some point that there is more information that you could share with me. Is that information I could also link in the show notes so that listeners have the chance to look it up afterwards?
Yes, of course. And of course, also we have a website where all of the PIs of our programs are listed. You're welcome to engage with them further. This is an area where we find it's still relatively fresh, and there's a lot of opportunity for community actually engagement on it. So I think please reach out to the teams and the PIs that have been awarded. Another really important thing is we have yearly as ARPA-E, we call a summit, which is a yearly event where all of our projects, we have 400 active projects right now on the floor, our electric motors, our battery work. This will take place in May 22nd to 24th in Dallas, Texas. So we'd love to invite people to come there, because every single showcase you see is selected out of 1 out of 10, the best technologies that might be moonshots. So it's a really exciting place to see potentially what the future could look like.
All right, so that event in May in Dallas could be interesting, but if not, then I will get back to you in at most 18 months. I'm excited about the work that you shared, and thanks for taking part in this podcast, Peter.
Marius, it was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting ARPA-E.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.